I'm on.
Hey man, the smoke has come out of the Vatican.
Oh my, this is an exciting moment. Every Baptist everywhere.
Just wait. You know what? I will say, I think that many, for some strange reason, this is like the first time that I felt like my Baptist people have actually cared. Like I'm getting texts like the Pope, he's an American. It's like, oh, okay, cool. But it's like, okay, well, so that brings us to today about this topic
Yeah.
of
Yeah, we
the
just
new
thought,
Pope.
yeah, we thought we'd talk about the Pope generally, not knowing that they would have already selected one, happened pretty recently. So, yeah, it's exciting. Should we care? As Baptist, I think we should. It's not an immediate big deal for us, but
Yeah.
it's exciting. So yeah, I thought we might talk about it. What are your thoughts, reactions? Why should we care? What do we think this new pope will be like? I think it'd be kind of fun. You want to jump in and just pray, and then
Let's
we'll.
do it.
All right. Well, join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Man.
And Lord, be with the Catholic Church. So, well, yeah, white smoke, all the kind of exciting things. I made the mistake of watching the movie Conclave last week. I don't know if you've seen that,
No,
but
what's it about?
it's about what happens in the conclave. It came out last year, so I don't know if they were anticipating Pope Francis passing sooner, but it's got this kind of horrible, terrible twist at the end that I didn't know was coming. So if you're a conservative Christian and you're watching that with your family, you might do a little research before you watch that movie.
Mm.
So, but it
Where'd you
was.
watch it on, by the way?
Well, I watched it on VidAngel, so I think it was. I don't know if it's on Prime or if it's on
Mm.
Netflix right now. I think it's Netflix right now. But yeah. So I can cut out most of the stuff, but the storyline at the end just kind of takes this worst case scenario twist for basically any Catholic and any, yeah, I think, faithful Christian.
Yeah.
So, um, but we have our own twist here today. The big question, what was it? Will they have select a cardinal as pope who will continue in the line of Francis, or will they pick someone more conservative? And then, of course, do we define conservative liberal in the broader Catholic congregation in the way that Americans do? That's what
Yeah.
I've been hearing in the press. How about you?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is as I'm trying to sift through this, I mean it's so early. I mean this news is what, 2 hours old now. And so like now we're in this like, okay, what do we got? What are we dealing with? It is. It's one of those things. What are going to be marks, I guess, that we would say are things that we would say would make him liberal versus conservative? Those are things I think that are worth talking about. Things that we would say. How would you define it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's worth looking at, and then I think also maybe some understanding of like for our own people to figure out like, does this really matter to them? Should it matter? How does it matter? All of that kind of stuff. I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so as Baptists, why should we care, right? Why should we care? And my response to that would be that in America, in particular, Baptists and Catholics represent the two largest bodies of those claiming Christianity as their faith, and so evangelicals and Catholics actually share a lot in terms of moral values, and we claim Christ. So. And in the SBC, one of the big things that we've been looking at is, women pastors and the law amendment and things like that. And will that come up at our next meeting? We'll have to have our SBC annual what to expect video here.
Yep.
But other than us, and it's the Catholics that have held the line on an all male priesthood. And so, if they move liberal on that issue, it would put some pressure on the Baptists and everybody else. And so there are certain things where, while we don't agree on every point of doctrine, we share certain things that kind of give us a larger bully pulpit in the broader American world and in the whole world. That if the Catholic Church moves, like the mainline denominations have, it would be we would feel pressure as a result of that. So that's a concern I have. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
think anything else comes to mind of why we should care?
Yeah, I mean, I think why you should care too. I mean, because it does affect, I would just say, even it affects the day-to-day discussions and I think conversations that you can have with Catholics is dealing with who the Pope is, right? I think it's a great starting point for conversation as you're trying to get to know your Catholic friends and neighbors to try to really distinguish like what they believe from what we believe, kind of like kind of hear out their worldview. This is a big one, right? Like this is a huge deal for why is it? I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's a major thing that they say distinguishes themselves from the rest of the Christian world, right? Is they have this successor to Peter, and they say that matters, right? That's so key that but what happens when and if this guy is like Francis? Like one of the things I remember, I was just talking to staff about this before I came on. Love watching the guy Lutheran Satire on his YouTube channel, and I love his little segments. I think he did a couple of them. The Frank the Hippie Pope, and he would always do like Francis is saying something, and then they'd have to have like the voiceover and be like, no, what he really meant to say was this is like the complete opposite. Always having to like clean up for what the guy was saying that was so against what Catholic doctrine had been. And so I do think it forces a crisis of when your guy is beginning to just leave the reservation, right? He's going off into unknown territory. How do you reconcile that you have this guy and then you have your church and your doctrine and all that? So I think it's important for that too, of just a witness talking to people, discussing beliefs. It's important for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and it's of course if you come from an evangelical background and a Baptist background, our congregational polity is something that is uh, very different, right? We don't have a monarch over the church in the form of a vicar of Christ who has almost close to supreme power. So I
Yeah.
mean, Vatican I in particular really identified the authority of the Pope, and it's um, especially if he chooses to utilize it's hard to contest. And I follow a lot of the traditional Catholics. Just I think the younger generation has been hungering for something that's uh, more tied to tradition, and the direction of the church has been more progressive, I would say, over the Francis pontificate. And so a lot of folks are really disappointed in this election because they see him as a continuation of Francis.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I was following some of the bloggers and people that I follow in that world, and they're really disappointed because they were hoping, they knew it was a long shot. They were hoping Cardinal Sarah or somebody would come. Very shocked to get an American. So that's interesting. Some of the folks were weighing in that they think that maybe that the American would be a way to stand up to Trump and that type of populist movement in the West that's kind of taking place. I don't know that they got hung up on that. I think that I would hope that's not the driver, right? You don't know what's going on in the conclave. And generally, you also never know what's going to happen, right? Because even with Francis, he moved things in a progressive way, but he didn't officially move things. And that's the real challenge. He would be very ambiguous on a lot of things. Who am I to judge? Those kind of questions would come at him with regard to the alphabet things. And so, but he didn't change doctrine much. I think the biggest change that I think is the remarriage, allowing the folks that are divorced to have the Lord's Supper. So that was the major change that happened several years ago. And then kind of I think the other major issue is the blessing of same-sex couples. But even that is not necessarily it wasn't good enough, right? It didn't allow those who are getting blessed to be recognized as in a union that God approves of. So it's a lot of ambiguity. But if we continue in this direction, it could be more concrete.
So
And
let
what
me ask
Francis,
you
yeah.
this. So
Mhm.
as you talk about that, because I was just having a discussion about this with a staff member right before I came on. So the idea that like the Pope, he leads the church, right? But when you say he does things, but he's not officially doing things, like what distinction do you make? Because I've heard other Catholics talk about this, but as you understand it, like I understand, like they say, like he will lead, like in some capacity to like to make some of those changes, but like is it beyond ex cathedra? talking from the chair, right? But beyond that, what are the ways in which he can officially lead versus all the crazy stuff that can be said? And then that's what they say, oh, he's not speaking on behalf of St. Peter's chair, he's not really doing anything, doesn't change the doctrine. So what are the ways the doctrines are changed then?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so it usually is slow, and one of the good things about the Catholic Church, and the reason that it's been slower to move, like we've seen in the Methodist Church and the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church, I chose them because they're also operating under a bishop structure. Um, the Catholic Church, because tradition is equal to Scripture in authority, and that has to be interpreted by the magisterium, among whom the Pope is head. That is slow to move. And so, really, the Catholic Church can't say it's a new doctrine. What they have to kind of say is that this is applied in a new way, or we've understood it in a different way. And so, probably the key place that you can see that in recent history is the change of the view on the death penalty. And so if you go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it is now viewed by the Catholic Church that the death penalty is wrong. We should not be implementing the death penalty. Well, 20 years ago, for the last 2,000 years up to that point, the Catholic Church endorsed the death penalty. And so it really is almost a 180-degree turn. And it cites kind of a growing awareness and understanding of humanity that we didn't have until recently, that gives us the ability to see that this is wrong. So that type of progressive movement in the Catholic faith is hard to do quickly, because they at the same time the Catholic Church wants to say that we've never changed. Every doctrine that they kind of adopt, such as the Marian dogmas that were finally made concrete, I think, in the 1800s, with the Assumption of Mary and the um, uh, Immaculate Conception as dogmas. Those dogmas had been around for a long, long time. In fact, many would say they've been around for the whole history of the church. We obviously would disagree, but to make them dogma, it required the Pope to speak, I think, about those ex cathedra. So you can do that in a hard way, but you can also softly do it. And Francis was a soft mover, and he was a synod on synodality kind of guy. So he didn't want to be that authoritative guy. He wanted to get the bishops to kind of agree, make recommendations, put out documents, and slowly say, hey, we're looking at this in a different way than we used to. And so that was very effective, but it's very slow. And so a lot of people are unhappy at how slow Francis was, and a lot of what he did. It's almost like executive orders that could be reversed because they didn't have the weight of a papal declaration like this is now officially dogma.
Hmm.
And the magisterium kind of just is in that fuzzy synodality place. So a new pope could be worse in that he could take what was the movement and make it concrete through official doctrine, or he could just continually push. So where Francis left off, the big question was, are we going to end up with women deacons in the Catholic Church? Which Southern Baptists, we're okay with women deacons. Most of us don't have them, but we're actually our governing documents say it's okay. Deacon in the Catholic Church is an ordained office that is in the line of priesthood, for the most part. We do have the
Hmm.
permanent deaconate, but they have the permanent deaconate. But the idea there is that if you get into the deaconate, you're really kind of step one to getting to the priesthood. And so, is that going to continue? Are we going to say that we've got a shortage of ministers in areas like South America that are matriarchal, and how are we going to reach these places? And so
That's how it
that's
always
the kind of
starts.
thing. That's the trajectory. So
Yeah.
so that's what's at stake. And I think the other thing that's at stake is Pope Francis went really hard at the traditional Latin Mass. And this is a huge deal for the folks that I follow in the Catholic world, is that they're drawn to that traditional Latin Mass. The growing young parts of the
Yeah.
Catholic faith are more traditional. And Pope Francis really kind of almost tried to push that out like it had been pushed out post Vatican II, but it made a comeback under Benedict. And they were even looking at bringing the Society of SSPX, Pius X. They were trying to maybe even bring them back into the fold. That was a group that broke off after the traditional Latin Mass kind of went away. So we have these movements. Those people are really concerned because Francis was all but eliminating that in many ways, making it almost impossible to go. So if that persists, the Latin Mass may be gone, which it is a beautiful Mass, and the Novus Ordo would be what would be left. So So anyway, those are the fears that I'm hearing. There's also the hope that, hey, you never know what's going to happen when someone gets put into an office like this. Maybe he's been a sleeper all along, playing the political deal to get here, and he's secretly super conservative. Maybe the Holy Spirit anoints this guy, and he just does great, wonderful things for the Catholic Church. That would be my prayer, because if the Catholic Church is more in line with Scripture and its practices and its beliefs, it's good for Christianity, and that would be, I think, my hope.
Yeah.
My fear, though, is that I don't think that there's not a lot of good marks that the one that they've called Robert Prevost, Leo the 14th, doesn't have a track record of being that guy. He's more in that Suffrage line, Chicago Catholic line, and that line has historically not been in recent years a very conservative area. So I'm concerned, but that's what I see. I'm talking too much here,
No, it's
and maybe
good.
I'm making too much of it.
Yeah,
Really, yeah,
I don't know, man. You start to think about, just the differences because I think there's different views that people have got. Like I look at there's some who are hopeful that like I think I looked at like Turning Point. They said, hey, from what we've gathered, he's got a conservative voting record. You could see that about him. I had an interesting take from it was interesting as I was looking on X saw Matt Walsh, who's a Catholic. He had an interesting thing that he was saying. Trying to see what he had written down because that's worth listening to, at least a Catholic perspective of all of this. And he said, here's what he said: if you're a Catholic, then you don't believe that this pope was elected through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So you'll troll through this Twitter feed and analyze his Twitter feed, analyze his selection through a modern political lens, as if he was elected as seat in the U.S. Senate rather than chair of St. Peter. If you're a believing Catholic, then you do or you should believe that his election is ordained by God. You view it through the lens of 2,000 years of church history and the eternal will of the Almighty God. From that perspective, playing the gotcha game with the old tweets is silly and bizarre. This is why any conversation about the Pope on this site is destined to be disjointed and confused, ultimately useless. And then he says, my very own early impression as someone who within the second category is there are some good signs and some bad signs with this new Pope. And I want to see what he actually does with his papacy before I pass any kind of judgment. If he does things I don't like, I'll say so, as I did with Francis. In the meantime, I'll pray for him for the church. So kind of a mixed bag on that. I don't think anybody quite knows.
yep.
But I do, he had an interesting comment, right? Which is that how should we view his election? And I actually take, I have, I have to take issue with his comment because I think in the grand scheme of things, everything is, I think that was he's a sovereignly chosen individual for this chair. Now, do I think of it as selection through the Holy Spirit? No. But do I think that God has placed him here in this position for this time? Yes. The question, though, is what will that role be in which God has placed him in that chair, right? Is God placed him in that chair to help steer back and to maybe, bring back Catholicism to a better place than where they're at now? Maybe, who knows? You could bring it to, you could have someone who could kind of bring back and actually bring them back, I would say more in line with biblical Christianity. Yes, I'm speaking as if like based on like reform, Reformation style Christianity of trying to go sola scriptura, but there's that piece, right? But it could very well be that God in his ordination has allowed this to be more of a, kind of bringing us back to where we were in the Reformation period, where there was just so much that was happening in that period that just lent itself to, hey, we're not staying. We can't stay in here, and we can't fix this thing. And so there could be that God raised him up for such a time as this to create even more confusion, so that people are going to have to say, what am I going to do? I can't stay. You're right. So honestly, I look at both of it like, yeah, God's involved in all of this. Just what way is he involved? I don't know.
Well, and of course, he could have a long pontificate and he could have a short pontificate, and there's been, all kinds of things that surprise people over the years. So you never know. I was praying for the Catholic Church, hoping that they would have a godly choice. And of course, it's always strange too, because I do believe our denomination is closer to Scripture, and I also believe it's closer to ancient church history, which that a lot of Protestants don't want to make that claim, but I hold to that. So
Trail of blood, man.
yeah, that's that. Well, I don't not Trail of Blood, but
Oh,
you know.
nope.
A number of things, and of course the Twitter battles on points of doctrine are typically not honest debate, rather just trolling each other. But there is an opportunity here that if under Benedict, he was inviting the Anglican Church, hey, come on home to the Catholic Church, come home to Rome, because they had moved so progressive that there were a lot of folks in the Anglican Church that felt like they had left the faith. Now, under Francis, the Catholic Church appears to have moved in the similar direction as the Anglican Church was moving, just not as rapidly. If it continues in that direction, I think you're going to see a lot of folks feeling displaced in their own church, and maybe they would be benefited by joining a different denomination. I think the people who are probably most excited about this selection are the Orthodox, because a lot of young people have been leaving the Catholic Church and going to the Orthodox Church because they are looking for tradition.
Yep.
And the Orthodox faith, boasts an older tradition than the Tridentine Mass. So that is something I think could happen, and we're already seeing Orthodoxy grow pretty rapidly. One thing that I would really like to see, and I've been talking about this for years, is I do get tired of going to evangelical worship services, and it's black, dark. It's a 70-foot TV
It's a
screen,
movie theater.
and it's very emotional in the music. It's nobody has a pulpit. Somehow the pulpit became, that was like the hallmark of the Protestant Reformation, was that the hearing of the word was preeminent, and now we
Yeah.
have a table talk, right? So I understand. I hate that stuff. Well, and I know people are trying to serve the Lord. We just have targeted non-Christians to make them feel comfortable, like they came to a convention center. I think young people that love the Lord are looking for something more transcendent and more traditional. I think that this should be something that we should be talking about in evangelicalism is, could we elevate our liturgies a little bit, our worship structures, to attract those that do feel left behind? Because I suspect we're going to see the trajectory of Francis continue, which would be something that might leave folks displaced. We've already seen the Methodists fold. We've seen the Anglicans, for the most part, fold to the pressures of the culture. The Catholic Church is moving in a direction that's more favorable to the culture than it was before Francis. So if that continues, I think the young folks in our world are going to say, "I just want somewhere that that believes this stuff for real, believes the Bible for real, and worships in a way that is not a concert, right?
Yeah.
It's deeper." So those are some things that I mean, maybe if this is not a positive in terms of the Catholics' immediate future, it could be a positive in for those of us that care about the people that feel displaced, for them to hear the gospel. So
Yeah, I mean, maybe, and maybe it is a second reformation of finally saying, well, maybe there were some valid points that were brought up, and these people, maybe we understand a little bit better that of why the first one took place. So I don't know, man. I can kind of go either way on this, but I do think it's interesting, to kind of just figure out how they process, how they work. I think another conversation that needs to be had at some point, and I know we can't do it here, but it's kind of on the fly, there are significant differences between Catholics and us. There are certain things that I think, in a spirit of ecumenism, ecumenicalism, right? I don't know which is it, ecumenism,
ecumenism, yeah.
ecumenicalism. I'll ask Grok in just a second. But understandably, like, I think there are things that we work with the Catholics on. I think the for the uh, sanctity of life, things like that. But I also think that, so while we're willing to work for common goals of stuff like that, I do think that sometimes that gets murky with people, and then we begin to say, no, we're all Christians, right? And because they speak some of the same language as us. We talk about the same things. We talk about uh, the cross and the resurrection, and we're talking about the same Jesus, as a difference that what we would be with a Mormon, right? Like with a Mormon, we ain't talking about the same Jesus. That's a different Jesus. However, right, there are some marked differences that I would say, man, those are some big holdups. It's not that they like their traditions and they got a pope and we don't. We're autonomous. We don't need anybody. We don't have a pope. Like there are some things that we would say, yeah, that's a problem, right? So I think like the indulgences thing still a problem, right? That's a big deal of you pay, you do your work, and you find indulgences still made for you that you can get out of purgatory better, easier, that kind of thing. The Mary worship stuff like that is. I was just watching Sister Act recently again, and some of the songs I used to think were so catchy. You listen to them, and they're just praise songs unto Mary, right? Like what? Like where did that come from, right? Like that kind of stuff is stuff that's concerning, and I think that we're not in the same playing field. We don't believe the same things on a lot of stuff. Like, we do similar things to some extent, but not everything.
Yeah, I mean, it would be helpful to kind of go over some of those issues, just because and then the truth is, I have a lot of folks in my church that come out of Catholicism or still consider themselves Catholic, and I try to be sensitive to that because of where we're located.
Yeah,
And so and I do have a burden for unity in the church. At the same time, that's why I think denominations are good to some.
yeah,
While it sounds like we're causing division, in many ways, what we're doing is putting in some fence posts where we can say that we're not unified on these issues, but we are unified,
yeah,
and that way we don't have to be in conflict. And the church is large enough to manage many denominations, so that doesn't bother me. We're united in the Spirit, in the communion of saints, under the lordship of Christ, and so I do see unity in the invisible church that is visible as it gathers. So I'm not. I don't think we need to have a pope to establish that unity, but that's why we're not Catholic, right? They think
yeah.
they do. I will say that Catholics will tell you they do not worship Mary, and so that's
Oh,
something
I
that,
get it.
but the practices for those of us outside of the Catholic Church mimic practices that you would say that looks a lot like worship. You bowing down to somebody or
Or the titles. I
is
mean, just the titles of some of that stuff. Like I get
yeah.
it. They say I
So
get how they explain it, right? I mean,
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
ignorant of it.
Well,
Of you go to the mom because she's going to be better to get you to Jesus, right? But there's certain stuff like
well,
literally.
so yeah. I'm pushing back because I don't want you getting me in trouble, even with my own church people.
Yeah,
So I want to steel man their arguments, and obviously practice doesn't always match stated doctrine in any
yeah,
church. But yeah, I mean, just as Solomon elevated Bathsheba in his court, that Christ elevated Mary. There's just a lot of what ifs, and then of course. I think someone who I really like, Gavin Ortland, on a lot of these issues. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he does a lot of good in trying to say these are the core claims, and this is where at our best we are not in agreement. And those are the kind of things that I do like to do. But yeah, it's one of those things. There are certain things that are just hard passes, and if you're in the Orthodox Church, filioque, you're not getting over that anytime soon.
yeah.
Uh,
That's one of those ones you're like, really? We split we split over that. I mean, I get it. It's
yeah,
a big
but
deal, but it
yeah.
I mean,
They're
it
still
was
pretty upset about it. Yeah,
really,
they're
yeah,
well that and they don't accept the Pope as head. Maybe
yeah,
first among equals, but not as head, and so that's never going to unite if it required that. And of course, Vatican I was not even in anyone's mind. I mean, the claims of Vatican I are fairly remarkable. And we don't talk about Vatican I because Vatican II really was a major change in what the Catholic Church looked like. But Vatican I established beyond any doubt, major authority claims of the Pope that already kind of existed, but that almost made it impossible, I think, for the Orthodox ever to come back because they don't view the Bishop of Rome in that light. So these are things, and as a Baptist, it's kind of nice to say, hey, we love y'all. I hope that you all have a living relationship with Jesus Christ, and as much as we're in agreement on that, we'll see you in heaven. But like you said, there are some hard differences, and even if Vatican II allowed the Catholics to call Protestants brothers, It still recognizes that we don't have a valid priesthood, which means we don't have a valid confession, which means we don't have valid absolution. With that being the case, it's hard to not follow that most Protestants are going to hell from the position of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Unless you get baptized and die like immediately, you're going to sin subsequently, and they don't recognize a valid priesthood to offer absolution. So
But
so
then
we're
Francis says,
brothers,
right?
but are we?
Yeah.
That's
But then Francis says, didn't he say, I mean, granted, it's like, what's official, what's not? Francis was like, all roads lead to heaven, man. Right? Like, you choose your path, right?
well, and
Like, I
that's
mean,
yeah.
but that's not,
And
that's one Catholic. It was the highest Catholic's view of it all, but not official doctrine, though.
so I'll say one thing about our new Pope. What's his Pope Leo? The new Pope is a very proficient English speaker. And I think this is going to be very interesting because a lot of what Francis would say, uh, there'd be people coming back and saying, well, it's got lost in translation. It didn't really mean that. And he's going to be able to say exactly what he means in English in such a way that's going to be a little hard for Catholic answers to kind of spin it like, oh, don't worry, Catholics have always believed this.
Yeah.
Where Francis really kind of made it difficult in a lot of ways. But the trajectory of the Francis pontificate was clear, and I think that we're going to continue in that vein. I mean, I was watching Taylor Marshall. He's really despondent. He's a major Catholic conservative contributor podcaster, and I grieve for so many that are really struggling with this because they see this as probably a continued assault on the traditional mass. And what's amazing is, from my perspective, is the Tridentine Mass after Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation Council, they established a unified liturgy that carried on up until Vatican II. And that liturgy actually combined probably 10, 12 other liturgies of the area and made a unified liturgy for the Catholic Church that didn't exist in its exact form prior to that moment. Well, that ran for a long time, and in so doing, it basically said if you're not doing it this way and you're not doing it with us, you're outside. It was very clear that Catholics and Protestants, we weren't brothers, and so you have a lot of really angry writings against one another in that period. But then Vatican II comes around and kind of changes everything. One of the big cardinals of that day, Archbishop Lefebvre, tried to maintain a seminary that continued to teach the traditional mass, and his followers became the Society of, SSPX, Pius X. I think that's right. There's the Fraternity of St. Peter too. It's hard to keep these together. So anyway, I'm a Baptist. So they still do the traditional mass, and he was excommunicated before he died because he ordained bishops, and the Pope didn't ratify those bishops, and so he kind of de facto excommunicated himself. But his claim was, how can I do the mass that I was saved under, that I did ministry under, that I spent my life performing baptisms under, and now all of a sudden it's not valid? And that's a really interesting question from the church that says we're unchanged. Now get on board or else you're out. And so that is really some of the difficult stuff going on in the Catholic Church right now that a lot of people aren't aware of. And what nobody expected was for the youngest generations to hunger for the ancient traditional stuff. All the young folks were supposed to be more progressive than what came before, but really, that it's that baby boomer, lingo that you get on Twitter, like okay boomer stuff, which I don't think is a very good thing. But you are seeing right now that the boomer generation is taking things in a continuing more progressive direction. The election in Canada, for instance, and the young people are coming up saying we hunger for something that lasts. And it's a very interesting time in our history. That fourth turning stuff might be true.
Well, I think it's good. I think what you're saying is good stuff. It's stuff to think through. It is. It's weird having a glimpse into a world that we're not part of. That's not our thing. I mean, it's just our Catholic friends, neighbors, things like that. Like it helps you to understand. But let me ask you this:
Yeah.
largely speaking, do you think most people even give a rip about who the Pope is in terms of Catholics? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like for a long time, the even when Benedict was there, like the people who didn't like Benedict didn't care what Benedict said. People like Francis, like so, like that they kind of look at him as like irrelevant to what they're all about. Anyways, he doesn't really have much bearing on their own private brand of Catholicism. You encounter some of that too with people that you know in that field?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to not put it in a political lens because the Pope is both political and spiritual in his office. So, most people in the olden days is like, I don't care who the president of the United States is. We basically do our thing. All politics is local. In an increasingly totalitarian world with technology that advances totalitarian means, it does matter. And so I think a lot of people at the pew level, they're just going to continue to do what they want to do. However, just things that I hear, they didn't used to allow people to have communion in the hand. You could not hold the bread in the hand because it's sacred, and so the priest would put that directly on the tongue of those receiving communion. When that changed, it in a lot of the trad Catholic groups that downgraded the mysterious presence of Christ by letting people hold it because it feels like bread, right? And so that little practice, which was something kind of small, that people say by doing that, the majority of Catholics doubt the real presence of the body and bread. Well, I don't know that one practice is responsible for everything. But it's significant, right? So it does matter. The idea that we're bringing divorced couples are allowed to participate in the Lord's Supper now. That's a huge change. That's a huge change. A lot of people looked at it as a good thing, and yet, Protestants were a lot more liberal on marriage and divorce than the Catholic Church was, and society has been easy divorceism really pretty dramatically in the last 50 years. I kind of grieve the fact that nobody's holding the line on, should you be at the Lord's Supper? And in fact, a lot of Catholics left the Catholic Church and came to the Protestant Church because they divorced and wanted to remarry. And so those types of things are, it might be a positive thing that we're a little bit more forgiving on the issue of divorce. And yet, is anyone holding the line on appropriate remarriage? Is anyone holding the line on an appropriate divorce? And we've done our videos on that. We've lost our way. So yeah, I think it matters. I think it matters big time because those types of things change in the worship service from the top on down.
Yeah.
Where in our life, if a church kind of goes weird and starts doing something, well, it's not going to really affect us. In fact, the people will probably vote with their feet at that church if it gets too weird, and they'll find something else. Where in the Catholic faith, you can't go to another church because it's all,
There's no other place to go.
they get that canon every canon. The missal every year of these are the songs we're going to sing, these are the verses we're going to read, this is this day, and it is pretty uniform throughout the entire Catholic world. So those are the kind of things that I think it matters more for them than we realize. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see. It's going to be interesting. For the most part, a lot of the laity they'll just kind of check out and do their own thing, so much as they're allowed to.
Well, I mean, okay, the reason I bring this up, right, is so we're going through Revelation in our men's Bible study. And I know that, as everybody starts talking about, Antichrist, all of that stuff, as we read in Revelation. And I know that, like, as you read, you go further and you want to try to find out who he is and what he's all about. You go back and you look at the reformers who, of course, were looking and they were saying, like, hey, Luther, especially, you talk about like the Pope is right, like this is who this is. But you look at that today and you're like, man, I just don't know. Like, I just don't know. Does the Pope have really that much pull or authority? Like for him, eh, like if he were to be that kind of a figure, right? To
Yeah.
where does I just don't see it. I don't see the authority. I don't see the much power there. Besides changing doctrine, could you be a false prophet to convert and to pull your people into apostasy? 100%, right? But I don't see the kind of power that we're dealing with now with the papacy versus during the time of the Reformation or even earlier, right? So I don't know. I just think that's an interesting. It's just something I've been thinking about in terms of the significance of their role outside of being a figurehead, being, because I've heard some Catholics talk about him as if, it's like, hey, he's like your pastor. He can say crazy things, but like every person, he's just a man. And they downplay like the importance of the being the successor of Peter, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they downplay that piece, and then but it matters when he talks ex cathedra. Which, by the way, let me ask you this: um, biblical support that you think? Let me just throw this out here for successor of Peter. Do you think that is a misreading, misunderstanding on of the passage on this rock I'll build my church? What do you think?
Yeah, that'd be a fun episode to just do our view on that.
It would be good.
Yeah, and I think probably we should.
Let me just
Uh,
put that in the notes because that's a great one to just
yeah,
say that's what we're going to
because
do.
yeah, offhand, my view on that is that there's a quote basically being pulled from Isaiah that Jesus is directing towards Peter, and in that passage, the office implied succession to some degree. And so that's the idea that since the Isaiah passage implies succession, that Peter getting that title implies succession. The question that I asked this on Twitter recently, nobody wanted to respond. It's okay, nobody follows me on Twitter,
Hmm.
so or X. What was, what does when did the keys? When did Jesus give those keys? He promises to give the keys, but when did he? Because in the Gospel of Matthew, there's no moment where Jesus says, "Here, Peter, here's your keys." I think that Matthew's playing with the idea of authority, and obviously Peter got the keys, but did he get them exclusively? Because the power and authority that's been given to me, says Christ, um, uh, resides in him at the end of Matthew. And so the reference to power that he's referencing to Peter, I think Jesus essentially keeps it and then he delegates it through the Great Commission. So, because all authority and power, is mine, go therefore and make disciples. And I'll be with you always. So I think Peter is basically the first one to receive, maybe, but he gets it with the disciples, and then it's passed on to all who, teach them all that I've commanded you. And so I see the succession is almost universal, and the keys are virtually universal. The thing that you'd have to look at is what the breathing of the Spirit in the end of John is, because the binding and loosing is attached to that as well. So it's a real interesting thing to discuss. But uh, I don't, and the other key is I think Antioch claims Peter as the first bishop of Antioch as well. So why Rome?
Yeah.
Why not Antioch? So there's a number of things that you can kind of deal with if you wanted to say there's question marks here, and there's definitely political realities that go with this. The capital of the world was Rome. The new capital was Constantinople. The fight between the East and West was partly over Filioque, but largely because of the fight between the East and the West, between the
Yeah.
ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople and the Bishop of Rome, the Papa. So, there's just a lot of things that are tied to that. But yeah, I think that's important. One of the things that you were saying, I may have lost track here. So I'll kick it back. I did lose track, but we should do a full deal on that because I think it would be helpful, because I think the confession is the rock. I think Peter's the little rock, and that the stone that everything's built on is Christ. So that's
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put that in our notes for for the succession and Peter being the one in which the church is built off of, right?
oh.
That's the argument.
This was what was coming into my mind. One of the things about picking Provost Pope Leo now, that is on people's minds is that Trump is trying to gut these NGOs, the refugee settlement groups. That is such a huge financial component for so many of the mainline churches and the Catholic Church in bringing these refugee settlements. And one of the things that has been proposed, and this is non-spiritual, and I'm not making an accusation, but I've heard Catholics say that they chose an American to go toe to toe with Trump to advocate for continue funding through these NGOs, these resettlement programs, because the Catholic Church needs those revenues so badly. So that could be a piece here that he could mobilize the Catholics in America to pressure to maintain this resettlement work, because the Catholic Church has become somewhat addicted to these funds, like so many churches. Even the SBC seems to be trying to get a little bit in on this. That'd be another one with the ERLC and these NGOs and what we're doing. So yeah, I think that's something that's interesting. I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist and all that, but why did they pick an American from Chicago and Peru? Just nobody expected this one. So
Yeah.
um,
Well, hey, I'll tell you one last thing to kind of go back full circle what we had talked about before. You said at the end of the day, it's a bad thing if the church goes, goes in a different direction and this guy furthers the Francis, direction, because it'll mean that Baptists and evangelicals are kind of left standing as the one set against some of this stuff of holding certain biblical principles. And I'm just going to throw in there, so at the convention last year, the book that came out right during the Southern Baptist Convention, right before it, was the book by Joseph Rigney, The Leadership and Emotional Sabotage. And I would highly recommend, if you're looking at anybody, to read that, because it's very good, well written, short, but the idea that we get steered by emotion, we get steered by pressure to change because we're looking around and realizing like nobody else is doing this. Why are we doing this? And I think that that's important, because I do think, like Baptists, we do, like, remember what it was, the old phrase that was like a couple years back, the world is watching, right? It's like, yeah, but so is God. And, what does God think about that? Not what does the world think about that? And so I do think that there's that pressure. I think that we've got to get better at and be prepared that if we are the only ones standing after that on holding on certain things, and hopefully we'll stay there, that we don't do a massive revision of our Baptist faith and message in the future and change things up, but that we maintain, a biblical witness regardless of anybody standing with us or not, My hope is that there would be others to still stay and hold it and say, hey, we're not the only ones, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important. That I was going to mention. That we need advocates. We need to be able to work with people on the issue of abortion, right? We need to be able to work with
100%.
people. In the Catholic Church, if you're more on the progressive side, you don't like to talk about the abortion issue in isolation. You want to talk about the seamless garment of all the ethical issues, and so poverty, and social justice and resettlement and all this type of stuff is tied together. So you don't ever really have to talk about abortion, because that's only one of the issues that's tied to caring for life, and that's the kind of thing that it makes things fuzzy. So is poverty equal in an assault on human life as abortion? Absolutely not. Abortion is the number one killer in the world, and it's the end of life altogether. Poverty is an issue, but what happens is that this is how the arguments are framed, and we could lose a really significant leader on the issue of life and abortion in the Catholic Church. And unfortunately, evangelicals were late to the game on this issue, and they're still really fuzzy on so many issues. And the pro-life community is not really they're not. Uh, they're not really in favor of completely ending abortion, right? What's the word I'm looking for?
They're not abolitionists.
Abolitionists. Yeah, so we're dealing with that even within our own fold, and if the Catholic Church gets fuzzy on that, it just means that we don't really have the gusto to confront these issues in a meaningful way. And so this is why it matters, and it really does matter that we get someone who's going to stand firm on these things, and lead the Catholic Church to remain firm where they are firm. And so so my prayer for the Catholic Church is that the new Pope will be that individual. If not, I don't think that that's the end of the world. I don't think the Catholic Church is the only representation of Christ on earth. I think, in fact, it may drive people out in order to strengthen their faith in denominations that remain faithful. So God could be doing a number of things, right? And
Yeah.
then I've also heard people that this is the end. That God's setting up the Antichrist regime.
Peter the Roman
Yeah.
is the
The World
final pope.
Economic Forum is going
Yeah.
to make, partnership with the Catholic Church, and then we're going to create some sort of universalism that's tied into all that. Sure, that could happen. We all went through COVID. I never thought that things could happen so rapidly as they did in that period. We
Yeah.
basically had the mark of the beast set up. So yeah, who knows where it's going to go? But I personally am disappointed by this pick. I don't think it bodes well for traditional Catholic teaching and faith. I think it bodes well for those that want to see the Catholic Church continue to conform on the sexual issues.
Yeah.
So that's my take as of now. I pray I'm wrong, and I could be wrong. Most everyone right now is just going to be excited it's a new pope, and they all want to think the best.
He's American.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's some cool things. He's got some cool things. There's some things that I didn't mention that will come out in terms of stories and the abuse crisis stuff that are tied to him. That we'll see where that goes. But I don't want to rain on the
Yeah.
parade entirely.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Catholic brothers and sisters. You have a new leader.
Well, last thing I want to say to this, and then I'm going to shut up after this too,
Yeah.
is this piece. I think it's important also to watch how they turn if they do, because we've been seeing how they turn. Like what you brought up about the pro-life issue, is how we've allowed that conversation to be hijacked, and we turn it to we're not just talking about keeping babies alive, but we equate all these other social issues as pro-life and we murky everything up. And that started with them, right? Like that's where you started to see the softening of that kind of stuff taking place and saying, well, pro-life is much bigger than this and that is just as important. And then we can kind of get away we've been trying to chip away, and a lot of that's to try to politically chip away at people, but that's where that position is, and so that's why we end up with the reversal of Roe v. Wade that you and I did a podcast on, and we had evangelicals saying, well, don't just get excited for this because there's so much more. It's like you can't be excited for one day, for something because you're so messed up in the head now that you've allowed your theology to be hijacked by this more social justice approach to things. And you're not seeing that, like, no, that's a big win. That's a good win.
Huge
And
one.
yeah, those
Yeah.
other things are important, but they're not in the same level. We can't equate the same. And I do think there's something to be said about doing that, but they can't be. They're not on the same level at all. But you watch and see how they give up those positions and see how that's going to affect and be used against us as well. So I think that's another key thing to watch and to see because they're the bigger target too about all that stuff. How do you try to chip away at those biblical foundations?
Well,
Yeah.
and I'll close it here. The other key too is when your denomination gets tied to funding that is not drawn from the people in the pews, you are way more inclined to be able to drift. And one of the reasons that we're so concerned about the ERLC, Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission for the Southern Baptist Convention, and some of the funds that it looks like we've been securing for other groups that are kind of established within the SBC, but with no direct oversight. Those kind of things. That's what is going on. I think. The lady that wrote the book last year. My brain just doesn't
Shepherds
work.
for
It's
Sale, Megan Basham.
Megan Basham's book.
Yeah.
That the major governments and major ideological groups are trying to buy denominations and
Yeah.
church leaders. And what I think has really taken place in many ways with the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church is they don't need the tithes and the offerings from the people in the pews because many of the people in the pews aren't giving like they used to because they've got concerns about the church. Um, so, they're not completely in crisis here. But the funding that they get through the government, the taxation, charitable giving through Germany, and then through these NGOs in Europe and America, is a hefty portion of the budget. And Baptists in particular need to make sure that we do not allow ourselves to be co-opted by funds. There's been suspicion that the ERLC doesn't really need the money from the Baptists to remain the ERLC because they can tap into these other funding mechanisms if they needed to, which means they're not accountable to the messengers. And those are the kind of things that we got to be really careful about. I don't think we're nearly as far down the road, but they've been trying, the same groups have been trying to get the Baptists tied to this. And a lot of people are like, hey, with that money, we could do a lot of good. Yeah, but then you become beholden to who's giving the money. So
Yeah.
I do think that that's a big concern. And you can't, while the Holy Spirit, we hope, led the votes that took place, we're flawed individuals, and a lot of those things are floating in the air. We've got to get certain things in place because money is a huge driver in these denominations, and including ours. So those are the things that just all tie together. Yeah, well, so it matters. We should be prayerful. I'm not opposed to having a little optimism. I don't think Francis was a very uh, good tenure for the Catholic Church, and I hope for a change in direction. Um, that's a Baptist. Catholics won't care, but there you have it.
Yes, to quote the Babylon Bee, their newest article, where was it that I just saw? Yeah, Catholics frantically, what do they say? Catholics frantically Google newly elected Pope to see if he's Catholic. Uh, Like it's just it's interesting stuff to think through. So anyways, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's all we can say at this point. Done. Put it away.
Yeah.
But I think papal succession, the Peter, Peter's chair, all of that stuff. I think that's an interesting one that for us to have a discussion on, and because I think that's a widely misunderstood passage, even amongst Protestant circles. Of they might even give in and say, well, yeah, maybe to some extent, sure, it was about Peter, and so we need to have an address for that. I think that's important.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And the truth is, it's a verse that has a lot of different takes among the fathers. It's not what it's made out to be. And God bless Peter. The Lord revealed something to him, and it was a great moment. Of course, in the same conversation, Christ turns on him and says, "Get out of my way, Satan." So he got a
Yep.
new name. So
Yeah.
there's interesting things in that context. But yeah, all right, you want to close this out?
Let's do it, man. All right. Well, the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you, and the Lord be gracious to you and give you peace. Um, thanks, thanks for listening, guys, and talk to you a little bit later.
All right.
All
God
right.
bless. We're praying
Bye-bye.
for you, Catholic Church.
You
All
too.
right.